Law and order, it was a central theme at the Republican convention. While that was happening, protests calling for racial justice unfolded in Kenosha, Wisconsin, in the aftermath of the shooting of 29-year-old Jacob Blake, who was shot in the back at least 7 times by police. Blake's family says he is unlikely to ever walk again. 2 protesters were later shot and killed, allegedly by 17-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse. He'd spoken to the conservative website The Daily Caller moments before the shooting, telling them that carrying a rifle to protect local property was, quote, part of my job. I want to ask Errin about something you mentioned earlier, which was the fact that Jacob Blake's name, even though this shooting happened on Sunday, really didn't even come up at the Republican National Convention until a few days in. Did that surprise you? Did you expect someone to mention it sooner?
Well, you know, given that there was attention paid to the protests, although that attention was focused, as others have mentioned, on looting and violence, you know, and given that the president is touting his record on criminal justice reform, you would think that there could have been some recognition of, you know, the national reckoning on race that is happening again on his watch this summer. But that isn't something that happened, and I think that actually is in keeping with the racial playbook that this president has been operating under, you know, that got him elected in 2016, that he used again in 2018, and that we've already seen him using in this campaign and headed into November. Listen, you know, the president is you know, the messaging that he's using is really aimed at energizing his base. It is not a message that is really aimed at expanding the electorate, even though you did see kind of a parade of black people in the lineup for the RNC this week. That is not reflective of his administration. That is not reflective of the electorate that got him into office. We know that black voters overwhelmingly rejected this president in 2016 and are not necessarily inclined to vote for him in any large numbers headed into 2020. Racism is on the ballot for a lot of the black voters that I talk to, and you know, them not hearing anything from this president in the way of empathy or understanding around George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Rayshard Brooks, or others is not surprising to them. And so I think the difference for those voters in particular is going to be whether a Biden-Harris ticket, how responsive they are, could make the difference between those voters being galvanized to really turn out for them in the numbers that are going to oust an incumbent president in general and this president in particular, or whether those people stay home.
Maggie, Haberman, the president comes back to the White House and the words "Black Lives Matter" are now painted in a nearby street. There were historic marches here in the nation's capital today. They continue, protests continue in cities across the country. And yet, even during the convention, the president was talking about law and order. The president had athletes, black athletes, as Errin just mentioned, other black Republicans coming and talking about the fact that he is the right leader for this moment. There is a dissonance there that is clear. Is that sustainable in the weeks and months ahead?
Look, a big difference between 2016 and now is that there is an expectation that black voters will turn out in bigger numbers than they did last time, and that they are more motivated to vote after seeing this president in action for 4 years, seeing his policies and seeing what he says and hearing what he says. And the consistent thing between 2016 and now is that the president has talked about law and order. It was a defining theme of his convention in 2016. It's a defining theme now. I think a problem for him, as Dan correctly said, is that the Biden folks are going to highlight that he is the president right now, not Joe Biden, and Joe Biden said as much this week. But I do think that, look, the president, a lot of what we saw in terms of them focusing on black voices during this convention was less about, frankly, appealing to black voters than it was about reassuring suburban white voters and women who have recoiled from the president's language and in some cases his policies to try to convince them to come back and vote for him. I frankly don't expect that to be a consistent theme that the president articulates. I do expect it to be a consistent theme his campaign tries to push, but as we have often seen, there is a split between how the president conducts himself on the trail and what his campaign would like him to be doing.
Dan, we've heard Joe Biden accuse President Trump of fueling the flames of the unrest, saying he's leveraging these protests for political advantage. When you look at a small Midwestern city like Kenosha, when you look at a place like Wisconsin, does turmoil in the streets there actually help the president?
Well, we'll have to see what transpires. You know, there has been some evidence that there's been at least some shift in public opinion away from broad support for the Black Lives Matter movement. What we saw after the George Floyd killing, obviously, was just an outpouring of support, and the poll numbers moved significantly and have been moving significantly. We'll have to see whether that begins to move away from support for the Black Lives Matter movement. At the same time, what I've been told a number of times is that that doesn't necessarily change the attitudes of people toward President Trump. And so there continues to be a perception on the part of lots of Americans, a majority of Americans, that there are serious racial problems that have been left unattended and need to be attended to. So we don't know at this point what this country is going to look like in late September or mid-October when people are actually casting their votes. If there is continued violence in the streets, certainly the president will do everything he can to point to that and warn that it would get worse under Biden. But it is a bit of a heavy lift.
Weijia, you are out there with the president and his team traveling. There's a rally there in the background, so we hope you can still hear us. But we've heard again and again from both the president and Joe Biden last week at the DNC, this election is historic. It matters, that right now there is a battle for the soul of the country. We've only got a minute and a half left, but when you talk to the voters out there, do they see it the same way?
The voters here do, and the voters at Trump rallies do. These, are the people who are at the core of his base, and he feels the energy from them. He responds to them, and when we talk to voters, they do hear the president's very stark warning that everything that he stands for is at stake, because I think the campaign and certainly President Trump himself have done an effective job at painting these contrasts and portraying Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as these left radicals who will again tear apart everything that they believe in. And so when you come to these rallies, certainly, but again, it's not necessarily these voters who attend that they really want to focus on. It's those people who have not decided, and there's still a lot of time between now and November, and the campaign thinks as they continue this message that they'll be able to court some of those people.